African history. Religious wars in Buganda. Religious wars in Buganda. These were wars that were fought between the different religious groups in Buganda, that is Muslims, Protestants, Catholics and traditionalists between 1885 and 1900. The phenomenon started with the coming of the first Arab to Buganda in 1844 called Ahmed bin Ibrahim. His coming led to the introduction of Islam. Later in 1877, the Protestant missionaries came, followed shortly by the Catholic missionaries in 1879, the coming that stirred Buganda in the later years. Therefore, by 1880, Buganda had believers in the traditional religion as well as believers in foreign religions of Islam and Christianity. The 1880s and 1890s witnessed the named religious parties fighting each other in what came to be called religious wars. Causes of religious wars. The untimely death of Mutesa I in 1884, just a few years after the arrival of Christian missionaries. His death created a political vacuum that was difficult to fill. The kingdom was left to Mwanga XI, a youth whose ruling style fell short of the charisma and political astuteness his late father had demonstrated in dealing with foreigners. Therefore, whereas Mutesa had successfully played the various religious factions against each other for political survival, Mwanga could not, which caused trouble. The rise in character of Mwanga, the new king. Mwanga was too young, inexperienced to manage the dynamics of Buganda society. He was described as a person who was very brutal, absolute and intolerant. He was also alleged to have been a homosexual and unbecoming behaviour that he had learnt from the Arabs. He is a king who disregarded his chiefs for advice. He hated all people who commanded respect in society. He thus sparked off the wars. They were caused by the weakness of the monarchy. It was a policy of the monarchy that foreigners be confined at the king's palace, policy that would have been good if the various foreign religious groups had cordial relationships. Instead, confining them became a great source of frustration, dissatisfaction to the proponents of the new religions. It was these weaknesses that were the root cause of religious wars in Buganda. They were also as a result of religious persecution. It is remembered that the introductions of new religions affected people's outlooks and caused confrontations between the converts and rulers. For example, Mutesa's pages who were young converts into Islam refused to eat meat slaughtered by the royal butchers in the court because the butchers were not circumcised, and this led to their being condemned to death in 1876, a phenomenon that later made Muslims to fight Mwanga. The most pronounced persecution was evidenced in the 1885-1887 massive killings of Christian missionaries culminated into Namigongo massacres. An important feature in the killings was that of Bishop Hannington, who was killed in Busoga on his way to Buganda on orders of Mwanga. It is a bishop's killing that sparked off the combined Muslim and Christian war against Mwanga, resulting into his first political exit in 1888. The killing of Bishop Hannington has been given a legendary explanation. It is claimed that, from Buganda culture, anyone who approaches a house from the back door must either be an enemy or an intimate friend. Hannington was seen as an enemy due to the direction of his approaching Buganda. Wars were a consequence of the internal situation in Buganda. It was characterized by traditional factionalism and the insatiable desire to fight for political office. Some people had political ambitions that engineered the wars. For example, people like Apollo Kagwa, Sime Kakangulu could not have fought for religious reasons. It was these wars that actually saw Kagwa become a prime minister and Kakangulu a powerful soldier and British soldier. Fierce competition between the religious groups for royal recognition and favours worsened the situation. I thought 1880s Buganda had already been divided into four distinct religious groups, namely the Muslims, the Catholics, the Protestants and the Traditionalists. All these groups fiercely competed for royal recognition and favours. If the competition had been healthy, the situation would have been different, but unfortunately it was not. This competition served as a root cause for instability that swept Buganda to the end of the 19th century. The 1880s and 1890s feuds in Buganda were also fomented by the traditional rivalries and differences between the various religious factions. What is true is that the Protestant Church had long broken away from the Catholic Church. It is therefore naive to state that the wars in Buganda were just a replica of the differences in doctrine. The Protestant-Catholic conflicts may have been worsened by imperial struggles between France and Britain. For while the Protestants and Catholics were struggling in Buganda for recognition, the British and French were also struggling over the control of the Nile and Egypt. When Protestants triumphed in Buganda, the place became a African history religious wars in Buganda. The involvement of Captain Lugard and Abiko in the political process in Buganda also fueled these wars. For example, in 1891, he armed the Protestants with 500 guns to fight the Catholics. Progress of the events last course. The arrival of Christian missionaries, that is Protestants, in 1877 and Catholics in 1879 set off new developments in Buganda. The new developments were worsened by the untimely death of Mutesa I in 1884. Mutesa's death left the kingdom to the youthful, thus incapable Mwanga XI. He was also inexperienced, erratic, brutal, emotional, and weak-minded. A year after he ascended the throne, Mwanga ordered the execution of Joseph Rugarama, Mark Kakumband. Noah Essa wounded the first 3 Christian martyrs on 31st January 1885. In October 1885, the Anglican bishop, James Hannington, was killed in Busoga on his way to Buganda on orders of Mwanga. On 15th November 1885, Mukosa Bakadam, the first Catholic martyr, was killed for questioning Mwanga's action in killing of Bishop Hannington. Between December 1885 and May 1886, many more Christian converts were killed. In May 1886, Mwanga ordered the converts to choose between their faith and complete obedience of his orders. Courageously, the converts chose their faith. This resulted into the execution of 26 Christians in Namigongo, mainly by burning on 3rd June 1886. The last to be killed in the crusade to finish the converts was perhaps Jean Marie Muzier, who was beheaded at Mengo on 27 January 1887. This, however, did not mark the end of the religious tension in Buganda. Mwanga had been overthrown, the Muslims turned against the Christian allies, chased them out of the capital. When Kiwi, who had been installed in succession at Mwanga, kept on indulging being circumcised, he was deposed and replaced by his brother Kema, who was promptly circumcised. The Uganda kingdom became an Islamic state for a brief era. After the eviction of Christian parties, the Catholics fled to the south of Lake Victoria. From exile, the Christian parties waged 2 separate attacks on Kema's regime but were defeated. Then the Catholics, most of whom had fought their way to Badu, had been joined by the deposed Mwanga. Soon, the Christian groups realized their weaknesses and joined to reinstate Mwanga, whom they had earlier overthrown. In October 1899, the Christian groups converged on Mengo, the capital, defeated the Muslims and reinstated Mwanga on his increasingly shaky throne. The Muslims northwards gained friendship with Kabilga of Banyora, and in November 1889, Muslims fought their way once again to the throne, sending the Christian in flight. Not until 1892 that the combined Christian parties decisively defeated the Muslims and scattered them. Mwanga was once again reinstated as king. The defeat of Muslims by the Christians did not mean an end to the chaos in Buganda. The Protestants, Bangareza or English, wanted a monopoly over Buganda and never wanted an equal status with the Catholics, the Bafaransa or French. Thus, with the aid of Lugard and Ibika, the Catholic party was shown its exit to the political backyard in Buganda and later Uganda. As a result, the war made politics and religion intertwined. The war saw Mwanga fleeing with some of his supporters in 1892. Soon threats of his deposition from Protestants and Lugard followed him unless he returned to Buganda. The threats were political in that whereas the Protestants in reality disliked Mwanga, they still wanted him. Effects of the wars. The wars that took place in Buganda in the 1880s and the 1890s resulted in the triumph of the Protestants. In effect, the wars established a principle that religion would be a basis of political association and action. As old African history, religious wars in Buganda. Besides, there resulted the entrenchment of Christianity, which in turn sparked off a cultural revolution in Buganda and later Uganda. Indeed, rather than deter the growth of Christianity, martyrdom of the dominant faith not only in Buganda but also Uganda. Noteworthy, however, is that Christian denounced all African religion ideas and practices as pagans and as primitive. The new convert vehemently demonstrated their intimacy with the new religion and a break with the past, abolishing most of the old customs and traditional religion practices. The war also demonstrated more than ever before the colonial aspects of the Christian mission. The Church Missionary Society, for instance, greatly yearned for British protection of Buganda, their converts and themselves. As a result, the colorizations of Buganda and Uganda at large was affected. Thus, it was not surprising that in 1894, the Uganda Protectorate was declared, and on the basis of the turmoil that had swept Uganda, the 1900 Buganda Agreement was reached so as to enable the British have a firm grip over Uganda. As a result of the agreement, the whole Buganda kingdom was reduced to a province, and the infant order CHWA only flattered as high as the Kabaka. An important impact of the war was the weakening and eventual overthrow of the monarchy. For instance, Kiwiwa and Kelma were all installed and removed by the religious parties. Mwanga was also several times reinstated by the rebels. The king, who was the locus of social and political unity in Buganda, was no longer such a person. The loss of power by the king meant that eventually the collaborating chiefs who became agents of colonialism gained power. Indeed, it is in light of these changes that one can argue that the 1880s and the 1890s wars were revolutionary. There were also multiple deaths, loss of property and general misery. First, the Mwanga massacres claimed over 40 known martyrs. Outstanding leaders were also killed in the war situation. Indeed, the period between 1880 to 1890 has been rightly described as an era of violence. It has been noted that the forces of nature such as famine and disease have the notorious habit of linking with the wars. Exactly that is what happened. The death toll from war, famine, and disease in this period probably surpassed anything that had occurred before in the history of Buganda. By 1900, so much blood had been shed in the blessed name of Muhammad, Jesus, and colonialism. Further, depopulation of Buganda was also caused by the migration of people to neighbouring territories for safety. The removal of the best talents by killing the most able leaders in the war also meant that the field for political opportunities was wide open for lesser personalities as well as those whose potential qualities in the leadership had been overshadowed. Such leaders included Seme Kakangulu and Apollo Gilmai Kagwa. Other effects.